Now we are going to learn how to remove a node from a queue. All right. For this method, we are going to call it Dequeue. You can look at it as the equivalent of pop or removing something. All right. But typical common convention is, or when we're talking about queues, is to call it Dequeue. So we're going to do Dequeue. This does not take any arguments. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to store a reference to the old first node. And the reason for that is because I'm going to call it old first node, and it's this first. The reason why I'm calling it old first node is because the value we're going to return from this method is this one right here, because we're going to remove it, and then that's what we want to return back. So that way the user of this method knows exactly what was the node that was removed. All right. So there's that. And next thing we're going to check is, this is an edge case. We're going to check if the length is 0. If this dot length is equal to 0, then we're just going to return undefined. Next is, if length is 1, then set both first and last to null. So it's kind of like resetting these values back to their default over here. So we're going to do if this dot length is equal to 1, the one and only, well, we're just going to reset the values by doing this dot first is null, and this dot last is null. We don't have to worry about doing the decrementing, this dot length minus minus, because we're going to take care of that regardless at the very end. All right, but just resetting the first and the last like this is sufficient. All right, else store reference to new first node. All right, so else, this means that we have more than one node in our queue. So right now we want to store reference to what is to become the new first node. So I'm going to call it new first node, and that will be this dot first dot next. All right, so it's kind of like, if we look at this diagram here, well, this is the first item in the queue, and this is the last. All right, so ideally, if we're doing Dequeue, we're removing. Remember, queue follows the FIFO principle, first in, first out. So if this was the first, this is the one when we call Dequeue is going to be removed. All right, so in that case, what we're doing, what we need is we need a reference to the new first node, which in this case is this one here. So by doing that, we have this first next. So we're having this first dot next. The next is kind of like the pointer, which is pointing to this the 20 here. All right. So now the 20 is the new first node. All right. Next, we're gonna make new first node the first. So now we're going to make it officially the first. So we're going to say this dot first is the new first node. So it's like as though this was, say this was first. I'm just going to have F for first initially, and then once we remove this here, this 10 here, well, now we're making this here, the 20, now the first. All right, that's what we did there. And then finally, the last two things is we have to decrement. We'll do this dot length minus minus, and then we're going to return the old first node. And this is why initially we had a reference here to the old first node, because that's what we wanted to return. So here we're going to do return old first node, or the node that was removed. All right, so that should be that. Let me set this like this. All right, so now let's go ahead and do some testing. Okay, I'm going to run this code. And first things first, I'm going to add the 10, 20, and then the 55 in that order. So I'm going to do queue.enqueue 10. All right, so we see there's a length of 1. If I now add the 20 is the next one in line, and the final one is 55. All right, so now we got 3 items, and 55 should be the last. All right, so now let's go ahead and use our dequeue. So dequeue, remember, queue follows first in, first out. So if this is our line up here, and this was the first one, this is the first one in line, then this should be the one to be dequeued. All right, because it was the first one in line before the 20 and the 55. So let's go ahead and test the dequeue. Let's do dequeue like this, and it should return to us the one that was removed, which is 10. So let's go ahead and press return. As you see, we get the node with the 10. All right, so now it's as though the 10 was removed, and now all we have remaining is 20 and 55, and we know that 20 should be the next one in line. So let's go ahead and do another dequeue, and you see that indeed 20 was the next one to be dequeued or removed. So now it's like we only have one item, which is 55. Let's dequeue that. And you see 55 was the final one, and it is dequeued. So at this point, our queue has nothing. So this should, if we were to dequeue again, well, it should, this line of code should execute, right, and return undefined. And let's go ahead and dequeue, and you see undefined. I can do dequeue again and undefined. Okay, so there you have it. We have our dequeue method for our queue.